and many others wanted Mitch Daniels to be president, but it wasn't of Purdue, something a little bit bigger than a Big Ten university.
Oh, I remember.
But he has now stepped down, as he announced last year he would at the end of last year, which he did. And he's had a very interesting and varied career, obviously as governor, as in the academy, as a university president. Also, not as many people know, he had a good run at Eli Lilly as a corporate executive. So maybe talk to him a little bit about his career in pharma, too, after the last 3 years of COVID. And more recently, as we discussed on the show, he was considering a run for Senate with Mike Braun vacating his Senate seat to run for governor to replace Eric Holcomb, who's term limited, the open Senate seat. And Jim Banks, congressman, is running. And there was a lot of talk that Mitch Daniels was going to run, but at the end of the day, he decided not to. So let's start there with Mitch Daniels. Thanks so much for joining us again. Great to have you.
Hi, Dan.
So, the decision you made, I read your statement, and it was interesting. You said, it's not the office for me, and also it's not the town for me. So the calculus of your decision not to run for Senate.
In the end, it wasn't a hard call. I had never really fancied myself in legislative office. I've been lucky enough to hold what I would call action jobs all along, whether it was business or as governor, and then, of course, the years at Purdue. But a lot of people I admired and respect said, you really ought to do this. The country has problems. You're worried about them too, aren't you? And so I went and had a look. But no, Dan, I don't know any shorter way to say it. It's a talking job. Right now, as we can see, it's difficult for people, any one person, to get something meaningful done. Mm-hmm. And out in that venue, and yes, as a matter, I'm not a fan of Washington D.C. and the culture there, and so I scouted it out, but didn't see anything that told me that this was the right way to use the next really 8 years of might be my last 8 useful years.
So are you going to open a bait and tackle shop, or what's next for you?
Yeah, that sounds appealing. Well, I've got, I haven't settled on and probably won't, on another 24/7 job. A couple came around, but I didn't think they were the right thing. There's some causes I'm already involved in or will be that have to do with freedom, individual liberty. And I'm involved in some businesses and can get a little more deeply involved now. So don't worry, my wife will make sure I'm not in the house much, but it may be a collection of things as opposed to one all-consuming round-the-clock assignment.
So, Mr. Daniels, are you going to be endorsing a candidate in Indiana's Senate primary?
Amy, the last 10 years, you'll recall this, out of necessity and respect for the position I had at a public university, I haven't had anything to do or say about partisan politics, and I'm not sure I want to come off of that position. It's been in some ways a comfortable place to be. So first of all, I'm not sure who'd be all that interested in what I thought, but secondly, I'll be very careful before I break what I used to call my vow of political celibacy.
Just talking about Indiana politics, though, a little bit more, obviously you see some shuffling going around. And it's a red state and the Republican Party is dominant, but that doesn't mean there's not internal discord. And there was such optimism going into last cycle in Indiana, as well as a lot of other places, that didn't quite happen, like the Jennifer Ruth Green against Frank Mervan, the opportunity to do something that hadn't been done in a century in Northwest Indiana. But give us your sense with some of the moving parts, and in primaries things always get a little spicy. But where you think the Indiana Republican Party is, and maybe compare and contrast that with where you think the National Party is.
First of all, it wasn't always thus. That when our team was elected in 2004, the other party was dominant and had been for a good long time. So these things are not foregone conclusions for all time. And we were always conscious of the fact you got to earn it and re-earn it all the time. I hope that's still the mentality of the Indiana Party. I know there are people who feel that we plateaued a little bit in terms of the kinds of actions that moved Indiana up in rankings of good government, rankings of fiscal strength, and rankings of business attractiveness. It's time for another surge forward, and I hope that the candidates who offer themselves will chart a way to do that.
Do you think the party nationally is in a sort of at a plateau, or perhaps a nadir? I don't know. We're somewhere in between.
I don't know how to characterize that. I have felt and said that I think that at the state level, and I think Indiana is a really good example of this. The politics which has turned off so many people can be redeemed in many ways, where you see states acting effectively against their problems. I think that builds confidence, which we've sadly lost a lot of in our other institutions. I think that where politics is conducted in a somewhat more civil manner, and I believe Indiana is a pretty good example of that, and I hope it stays that way. So we can't, no one state or no one figure can, move us out of the rather, I think, unfortunate situation that we've been in nationally. But I do think states can set really good examples, and I believe our state has been one, and I hope we'll do that even more so.
This question is not sending you out to pasture in any way here, but as you look back in your time, if you don't run for office again, as you look back in your time as governor, and now you've had some time between, a good 15 years in between, where you can think about the what you did and what really is part of your legacy, because it's survived and thrived. I know a lot of people would say, capital formation and business creation and making Indiana a magnet for, well, among other places, Chicagoans, and really turning around that state's economic fortunes. But for me, it's the way you advance the flag for school choice, and what that meant for K through 12 education going forward, and then previous governors have built upon that. But I wonder how you think about your 2 terms as governor of Indiana, and what you're sort of most proud of, or what you think will have the longest lasting impact.
Well, the example you mentioned is certainly up there. It was one of many things we tried to do to give young people in Indiana a better educational head start. And I think that it did mark a big step forward nationally. And I think you can date other steps forward in educational freedom from that time. Other states took note and copied it. Yes, I always feel good about that. The term social justice gets thrown around, I think, awfully loosely. Nobody owns that term. We all have to debate what justice is. But whatever it is, it has to include the possibility that low-income and poor people and minority parents should have the same right to pick a school for their kids as their rich or wealthier neighbors do, as a high percentage of public school teachers do pick a non-government school. And so enabling them to have the same choice as those more fortunate, is something certainly high on the list of positive memories I have.
And what was your biggest challenge when you were president of Purdue University?
Recruiting Zach Edey.
I think, well, happily...
go through COVID.
Happily, there wasn't that much competition for him. I'm sure other schools are kicking themselves. They didn't see what Coach Painter did. No, I guess the biggest challenge was to maintain and I think build an atmosphere and an environment committed to freedom of thought, freedom of expression. There are a lot of pressures across the political spectrum against this these days, and universities need to be really the flag carriers, the bastions of that. I think Purdue represents that, but it took some work. For instance, every Purdue freshman for several years now, on arriving at campus for their orientation sessions, one of the first things they hear or take part in is a module on free expression and why it's important and what it means. And if you hear speech or ideas that you disagree with or bother you, what's the appropriate response and what's not? And so it really wasn't that difficult, but it was a challenge because so much of the rest of the landscape has lost its bearings on that question.
Well, you see it going on at the University of North Carolina right now, where they're being threatened by accreditors for opening up an institution of civic learning, which is meant basically free marketplace of ideas, of different perspectives on the salient issues of the day, and they're being threatened with their accreditation. I mean, to just highlight a more recent example of what you're talking about.
There are way too many such examples. North Carolina trustees have stepped up, though, in a big way. At least if the things I've heard and read are accurate, more power to them, because they are trying to move that institution back in the direction of freedom of inquiry. Dan, the point that some folks overlook, in addition to all the other reasons that this is that free speech is the first provision of of the Bill of Rights, is that knowledge and the advancement of knowledge is the assignment of higher education, and it stops when there's enforced conformity of thought. Knowledge only advances when differing ideas collide and compete, and so it's not only unconstitutional, it's not only an infringement of individual freedoms, all of that. It's also a violation or an abdication of the fundamental assignment of higher ed, which is to advance knowledge and transmit it to the next generation.
I mentioned at the outset your career as an executive with Eli Lilly, and I just wonder, and then having to navigate all things COVID as president of Purdue University, I wonder how you look back on the last 3 years and offer an assessment of the response that was chosen by the powers that be, and the role that big pharma like Pfizer, Moderna played in the policy choices that were made.
First, I'll say, and I devoted basically an entire commencement speech to this subject 2 years ago, I think history will deal very harshly with leadership in various sectors of society for its failure to exercise its fundamental responsibility. Leadership in any position of significant responsibility or broad authority is always about choice, choosing among competing priorities. Do I spend the money here or there? Do we add more people here or in some other area? When you can't do everything at once, which things are the most important to do first? And instead of making those, dealing with that fundamental assignment, people in government, people in education, many people in business and others, put their blinders on, panicked, and committed themselves entirely to one priority, namely nobody's supposed to get this virus ever, even if they are young, healthy people who are not at real danger of it, for instance. And this, I think, as a consequence, as we've all seen, they wreaked incredible collateral damage on other health problems went unattended, as people suffered mental illness, even suicides, drug use, opioids, all of that. The educational cost to children has now been measured in many, many months. It will be very difficult to recover, not to mention all the economic damage they did. So, sorry to rattle on, but I just think this is such a fundamental question. I hope we learned something from that. And, the next time somebody says, we have one goal and one goal only, and everybody go over there and shut up, I hope that there's more pushback. The people who signed, so-called Great Barrington Declaration, scientists were right,
Yeah.
Yep.
proven right. And they were vilified, not just disagreed with, but castigated personally by people in the highest positions of government. And that was a shameful episode, and let's hope we never repeat it.
But you were such a strong leader at that time, because I remember you came on the show and you said, we have to open in the fall. We will be open. And you took measures. Did you get any pushback for that?
Yes, of course. And listen, I understood it at the time. There was a lot we didn't know. And that's the whole point I was just trying to make. You have to make decisions. When you're entrusted with a big assignment, like so many of us were, you have to make decisions before you know everything you'd love to know. That's what you're paid. That's what you're paid to do. And as I say, to weigh different priorities. And in our case, our priority was, if we possibly could, not to interrupt the education of these young people. And we didn't know if we could make it. And it was touch and go all the way, but and a marvelous collective effort that included the entire Purdue community and every single student, everyone doing his or her part. We did make it, and I wouldn't want to repeat it, but I've always said it was one of the most, ultimately fulfilling experiences that I've ever gotten to go through.
He is Mitch Daniels, former president of Purdue University, former governor of Indiana, of course. Mitch Daniels, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate you having me. See you. Bye.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Eric was way behind on his taxes.
I owed a lot of money to the IRS, almost $15,000. I tried to make payments.
The IRS wasn't satisfied with Eric's efforts, so they came after him full force.
They're coming to put a lien and a hold on all my income, my home, my car. I was just overwhelmed at what to do.
Then Eric called Optima Tax Relief.
When Optima Tax got involved, the calls would stop, the threats would stop. It was easy like 1, 2, 3.
Optima Tax Relief is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, and their team of expert tax professionals took care of Eric's problem.
I owe $15,000, and now my debt is clean. I don't owe anything.
Take Eric's advice.
If you have a tax problem, you need to call Optima Tax now.
Call Optima Tax Relief for a free consultation. Call 800-965-1433. 800-965-1433. 800-965-1433.
Optima Tax Relief.
Some restrictions apply. For complete details, please visit OptimaTaxRelief.com.
Did you give up on your New Year's resolution?